Hey everyone, thanks for joining us over here. And this week's edition is on credit score management. And I'm honored to have Ted Rossman from Bankrate to speak on this issue.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So Noyak is all about creating wealth management and financial education tips for Gen Zs and millennials who are high earners, but they're not rich yet, due to lack of financial literacy. And one of the issues that they have is credit score management. And we have about, a few questions to dig into. First question I have for you on this topic is, many young people are just starting to navigate their financial lives. What are the fundamental concepts of credit scores that you think everyone in Gen Z and millennials should understand?
First of all, credit is really important because it affects many aspects of your financial life, namely your ability to qualify for loans and lines of credit and the interest rates you'll pay. And by the way, it's not just loans, it's also things like apartment leases, cell phone plans, utilities. Even some employers will check credit reports before extending a job offer. So your credit score is really important. What goes into it? Payment history is the number one factor. Want to make sure that you've paid your bills on time. FICO, the Fair Isaac Company, devised the most popular credit scoring formula, and 35% of that formula is your payment history. Late payments can stick with you for up to 7 years. Now, the impact is going to be most pronounced within the first couple of years. Ultimately, your credit score is supposed to predict your likelihood of repaying a loan. So they look quite strictly at your payment history. Next is how much you owe. That comprises 30% of the formula. A key component of that is credit utilization, credit you're using divided by credit available to you. Think about a credit card, for example. If you have a $5,000 limit and you're using $1,000, well, you're using 20% of your available credit. That's pretty good, actually. Anything below 30% is generally quite good there. So together, those factors are 65%. So the rest of it is length of your credit history. That's 15% of the formula. Longer is better. They want to see that you've had a good track record. Speaking of that, the mix of credit is important. That's a 10% factor. They want to see that you've managed different types. Installment loans like auto loans and mortgages, and then revolving credit like a credit card where that limit kind of flexes up and down with usage. And then finally, 10% is recent inquiries. If you've applied for too much credit recently, that's actually a risk factor that you might be in danger of falling behind.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I think, speaking on my behalf, I think I made a mistake on opening too much too quick, and at the same time, not opening much for a while. So now I learned my lesson and I saw a massive hit on my credit score, and it's something I learned it too late. But yeah, hopefully this advice, people will take it more seriously who are around my age and slightly older. And
yeah, there's definitely a happy medium there as far as not applying for too much, but also not avoiding credit. I'm glad that you brought that up. I have a younger brother who for most of his 20s avoided credit. He was scared of debt, didn't want to get a credit card. This is really emblematic of a lot of Gen Zers and younger millennials where maybe they have student loans, they're worried about taking on more debt, maybe they've seen what's happened with parents or older siblings. If you use a credit card responsibly, it can be a great credit building tool because you could get a no annual fee credit card. You could pay it off every month, avoid interest, get the rewards, get the credit building impacts. You're not going to sign up for a mortgage or a car loan just to build credit, but you could actually sign up for a credit card to build credit. And then that's going to be a stepping stone to other financial products. So we certainly don't want people paying late or racking up too much debt. But this is an important point that avoiding credit can actually be a blemish as well.
Yeah, for sure. Totally agree with that. And what are some misconceptions on credit scores that you frequently encounter among young adults, and how can they set the record straight?
One of the biggest misconceptions is that carrying a balance helps your credit score. That is definitely false. The best way to use a credit card is to pay on time and in full every month. This is when credit cards are working for you. Half of cardholders pay in full every month. So for them, they don't owe interest, they get rewards, they get buyer protections, they get all the credit building benefits. Secured cards where you put down a deposit that serves as your credit line are often a good starting step for Gen Zers and younger millennials. Student cards as well can be easier to get. Sometimes people get a store credit card as their first card. You have to be especially careful with those because they have very high interest rates. But if we go back to that point about paying on time and in full, well, then the interest rate doesn't matter. Getting started early is really beneficial. You could also consider getting on a parent's credit card as an authorized user, and a lot of those benefits will then translate to you. But yeah, the big myth is carrying a balance helps you. You don't want to carry a balance.
For sure. And for those who are new to credit, this is going back to our previous question slightly. What practical steps would you recommend for building strong credit history? And are there any specific tools or products that are particularly beneficial for this age group of Gen Zs and millennials?
It's important to get started. Even if you're debt averse, that may be a healthy attitude, but you're going to need credit at some point. I mentioned everything from apartment leases to utility plans, future loans and lines of credit. You want to get started early. Credit cards, as we've said, are a great way to do that, but there are some other steps too. There's a program called Experian Boost where you can opt in to have the credit bureau look at your bank account. And with your permission, they're going to look for on-time streaming service payments and cell phone plans and even some rent payments. These are things that are sort of credit adjacent. They haven't traditionally counted in credit scoring in all cases, but they show some of the same financial responsibilities. So there are some new-ish kind of tools like Experian Boost, which is for people with existing scores that are looking to bump them up. Or there's actually kind of a sibling program called Experian Go that's for people that are completely new to credit, and they can actually jumpstart you because there are a lot of people that is what's known as credit invisible, that they don't even have credit information on file, or maybe they're known as thin file where they have a little bit but not enough to really calculate a reliable score. There are a lot of young adults who are outside the credit system because they're new to credit. Maybe they're new to the country. This is a pain point for immigrants because credit does not translate from country to country. So, a lot of times we hear about young adults, immigrants. These are people that are looking to build credit. And there are tools out there. I mentioned Experian Boost and Experian Go. There are some others too, some fintechs that are poking around various aspects of this. Kickoff is one that will basically for a small fee extend you a credit line every month, and it's a little gimmicky, but it's kind of a way to make a small payment, get a credit line on your credit report. There are companies that are practicing cash flow underwriting and issuing credit cards to people that maybe have really good fundamentals, like they have a healthy income, they don't have much if any debt, but maybe they're outside the traditional credit system. Maybe they're an immigrant. There's a company called Tomo that was founded by Christy Kim, who was an immigrant from South Korea who, fit this profile. Good education, good income, didn't have a credit score and had a difficult time establishing credit. So, a company like that has made it their mission to basically approve more people. And the way they're doing that is they're not looking just at your credit score. Like if you apply for a credit card from a big bank, the biggest factor they're going to look at is your credit score. But if you go to a company like Tomo or Pedal is another one where they're younger companies that have credit cards that are more accessible to people that are maybe outside the traditional credit system. So these are all ways to get started. I said a secured card is another one where you put down a $200 deposit and that serves as your credit line. And that's very safe, but it can help you build credit and piggyback to better things.
For sure. That's great. And now, considering everything's much more expensive for, Gen Zs and millennials now than how it was 15, 20 years ago, how can young adults manage a healthy credit in the longer run, especially when they're navigating various challenges and liabilities? For example, student loan debt or, just starting off the career and even buying an auto loan or a car. How can they manage credit score with all these liabilities kind of hindering them from, expanding their finances or their just expanding their horizons overall?
Yeah, we've talked about some strategies for establishing credit. Now we're sort of pivoting more to that maintenance mode. So maybe you have a credit score, but you want to give it some care and attention and keep it on the upswing. Look at annualcreditreport.com periodically. Despite the name, it used to be one credit report per year from each of the three major bureaus, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. Now you can actually get them weekly for free. Now, weekly may be a bit of overkill, but every few months, perhaps, check your credit score. You want to look for errors. The FTC says that about 1 in 5 Americans have errors on their credit reports. These can really drag people down if it's an account that doesn't belong to you, or maybe you're accused of a late payment when you actually paid on time. So you definitely want to check this out periodically. It's important also to stay on top of your existing accounts, make sure that you're paying on time. Make sure that you're not using too much credit. This is actually something that can drag people down, where even if you're paying your credit card in full and on time, if you're using a lot of your available credit, if you have a $2,000 credit limit and you're using $1,500, if that's what shows on the statement balance, it looks like you're using a lot of that credit. So a couple of fixes could be make an extra payment in the middle of the month, knock that balance down before the statement even comes out, because that's usually what the bureaus are looking at, is what you owed as of the statement date. So knock that number down, or maybe ask for a higher credit limit. We're starting to get into some of the more advanced or intermediate strategies for once you've established initial credit. These are things that you can do better over time. If you've used that credit card responsibly for 6 months or a year or 2 years, maybe ask the company for a higher limit. Don't use that as an excuse to overspend, but having more credit and using less of it is a good thing. A lot of young people, their biggest monthly expense is rent. You want to look for ways to incorporate that into your credit score, because that has not traditionally counted. There's a company called Bilt, B-I-L-T, that's doing some really interesting things with, they have a credit card that gives rewards on rent. They also have the ability to report some of these rent payments to credit bureaus, which can be really beneficial. There are other services out there too, like Rent Track and Rental Karma. And sometimes there's a fee. Sometimes you need to pay your rent through a little different interface, like you need to pay through their platform, and that may not mesh with how your landlord wants you to pay. But because rent is the biggest monthly expense for a lot of young adults, you want to think about ways to get credit, quite literally, for that on your credit reports. And other than that, just sort of periodically staying on top of where you are with your spending and how much you owe. And especially when you're young and you're starting out, I feel like it should be more about establishing good habits and avoiding fees. Maybe save the fancier reward strategies and the higher annual fee credit cards for later on. Get those fundamentals right first.
If someone, who's a Gen Z or millennial, high earners, like typically $100,000 or more, they missed a payment, or they have a high credit utilization, how and what are the best steps that they can take to recover and improve their score? Because we just talked about, what not to do, but if they end up going this path, what can they do?
Late payments don't typically affect your credit until they're 30 or more days late. You might be charged a late fee by the lender if you're a day late, but it doesn't usually affect your credit unless you're 30 or more days late. So one thing would be hopefully catch it before any fees or penalties kick in. But if somebody slipped up, if they are past that 30-day threshold, you want to get current as soon as possible. If you're really struggling, you have a personal issue, maybe it's a medical issue, maybe it's a natural disaster affected you, or you lost your job or whatever, it actually makes sense to speak up sooner rather than later. You can ask the lender for a break. Maybe they'll rearrange your due date. Maybe they won't penalize your credit right away. You could work with a reputable nonprofit credit counseling firm as well, someone like Money Management International or GreenPath. Try to avoid these problems before they've happened. Sometimes if you've paid late and you ask nicely, or you write what's called a goodwill letter, basically asking for forgiveness and this to come off your credit report. Technically, lenders aren't really supposed to do this. Sometimes they will, if you ask nicely. There's kind of a whole controversial credit repair industry where for-profit firms will sometimes help you dispute information. It's kind of a gray area. Ethically, you're not really supposed to dispute true late payments. I mean, if it's an error, by all means dispute it. But, technically, if you honestly paid 31 days late, you're not really supposed to dispute and get that removed. There are some firms that will, for a fee, help you do that. Might work, might not. That's a little bit of a sticky kind of area. You could also focus on filling your report with good information. That's one of the main things that you can do as far as like, okay, you've got a late payment. One of the things you can do is counterbalance that by as much positive info as possible. Maybe, getting on a parent's card as an authorized user, or signing up for a new credit card if you can qualify. It's not going to make the late payment go away, but it will mitigate some of the damage, and that impact will fade. I mentioned that negative info sticks with you for 7 years. The impact is most pronounced in the first year or two. And, especially if you have other positive info, you can start to improve your score. This would be a great instance where signing up for Experian Boost could help, and pulling in some of those cell phone and streaming and utility payments. eCredible Lift is another example. This is a company that has about a dozen utility payments that they can pull in. So, maybe if you're paying for trash service or water or electric, gas, lots of different things that they can pull into the credit report. And then also take steps to make sure that the negative event doesn't happen again. So maybe sign up for auto payments so that you don't forget and miss a payment, things like that.
For sure. And one last question for you is, especially this is much more common in Gen Zs and millennials, signing up for credit cards with, special rewards, like for example, and like high annual fee cards like the Amex Platinum or the Capital One Venture X. And I'm guilty of one of them. And how do you what advice would you give for, Gen Zs and millennials who are trying to get these rewards, yet at the same time who want to build credit? Because I'm seeing these stories how many Gen Zs and millennials want to have 5 to 6 different high rewards credit cards, but how could they manage a credit score while having this many credit cards?
You can have a lot of credit cards and have good credit, but you need to do it over time. I know people who have 30 credit cards and they have great credit, but they didn't sign up for 30 cards all at once. These are spread out over a period of many years. I'm a big proponent of walking before you run. Especially when you're young, look to establish good habits, avoid fees. Over time, you can layer in more cards, including those with high annual fees. The Amex Platinum has a $695 annual fee, and there's a lot of sticker shock associated with that. But it can also be well worth it if you're using the benefits. Everything from airport lounge access to more everyday stuff like a Walmart Plus membership, and credits for certain streaming plans, and airline fee credits, and Uber credits, and dining credits. And there's a lot of value that can offset that annual fee if you're using it. So you need to think through your habits. That's especially true with these higher annual fee cards. If you're using the benefits, you may actually come out ahead. But any good credit card reward strategy starts with paying in full to avoid interest. The average credit card charges 20.5%. So it doesn't make sense to get 1 or 2 or even 5 or 6% in cash back or airline miles if you're paying a hefty interest rate. So you have to get the fundamentals right first. But after that, you could certainly look to layer in some higher end rewards cards as long as it makes sense for your budget and spending habits. Different cards emphasize different things. So you want to think through, where do you spend your money? What do you want to get out of the rewards? How much work are you willing to put in? Travel is often more lucrative than cash back, but it's more specialized and it's more work. So cash back is more for the masses. Travel can be great if you're willing to put in some work to find the best deals, and if you're flexible to travel on the optimal dates. And you also want to make sure, as I said, with any of these, that you're not paying interest. That's the biggest consideration.
Thank you so much. That is really good insight. And that's all the questions I have for you regarding this topic. And I think our readers, our 135,000 readers, would just find it really insightful. And I want to thank you so much for your time here, Ted.
No problem. Yeah, thanks for having me.